Hi guys, welcome back to my lab and today's video, which is going to be my review and 2 looks using the brand new Picking Peonies palette by Simply Posh Cosmetics. This is the latest addition to their line and I picked it up along with 2 other palettes that just happened to restock in time for the release. Before we get into the video, if you're new here, I'm Jody. Thank you so much for joining me for today's video. I hope you're going to enjoy it, and if so, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up while you're watching and hit the subscribe button if you would like to be friends. Now without any further delay, let's go ahead and get into the video. I'll leave timestamps down below in case you'd like to jump around, but basically I will be going over my purchasing experience, share some swatches, and my review on the palette, and after that I will go into 2 looks that I created with this palette, one of which is the one that I'm wearing today. I purchased the palette on launch day, which was February 2nd. By February 4th, I already had a shipping notification, and a few days later, I received the palette along with a couple of other goodies that I picked up. So this is what the outer packaging looks like. This is the Picking Peonies palette by Simply Posh Cosmetics. This is the front of the packaging. On the back side, you have information about the ingredients. You are told that there are 2.2 grams per shade. This is a cruelty-free palette, has a 36-month shelf life, but I'm not seeing any information as to where the palette was made. Like Beauty Bay, the packaging is a little bit more bulky than the palette itself. This is what the palette looks like. The inside cover does reflect what is on the outer box. You do have, again, the same information that is on the packaging. You have it on the palette itself, which is something that I really appreciate. The box was bulky because the palette comes inside bubble wrap, which I appreciate. Here's what the palette itself looks like. This is an 18-pan eyeshadow palette where you have the top row and the bottom row are going to be matte shades, and then your center row is going to be duo or multi-chrome shades. This white packaging always throws off the white balance on my camera. I've tried to do custom white balance, but then everything is yellow, and so I prefer to just leave it on automatic white balance, but then whenever I show something white, everything kind of takes a yellowish hue, so I apologize for that until I figure out my camera settings a little bit better. But I did want to describe the palette, and you can see by its arrangement, it's kind of arranged in 2 9-pan palettes. So you have a more rosy 9-pan section over here, and then you have a more green, murky tone. So this is a floral inspired palette, and so I think the color stories were really nicely selected to go along with the theme and also the time of year in which this released, just shortly before Valentine's Day and a little bit before the beginning of spring in the United States. It's funny that even though the color story is floral and lighter in color, both of the eye looks that I created are going to be a little bit more vampy. I just went into a lot of these deeper shades and it did smoke out the look quite a bit, but it's absolutely possible to get a lighter eye look with the palette as well. When you swatch the mattes from the palette, they have sort of a see-through quality. I don't want to call it translucent because that's not the case. You can see the pigment for sure, but you can see your skin through it. However, when you apply them to the eyes, they are absolutely 100% buildable, and I actually appreciate that because you can build up to the color intensity that you would like. When working with the mattes, another thing that I noticed is that there's about 2 formulas in regards to the mattes. For instance, the shade Garden, Elegance, Bud, Meadow, Bouquet, and Delicate. These shades are true mattes, and they're a little bit powdery when you dip your brush in there, but it's nothing too extreme. It's not like the Anastasia Beverly Hills formula, but it is a softer formula. It picks up really nicely on the brush, but I do recommend that you tap off your brush before you go in, especially if you've already got your base makeup on. The reason why I said that there's 2 formulas is because there are mattes such as Seedling and even Peonies or the shade Fresh, where when you look at it in the pan, you can see shimmers. You can see little bits of mica in the shade itself. It's not like one of the sequin shades from ColourPop that have a lot of shimmer or the ones from Too Faced, but there are discernible specks of shimmers in there, and I presume that it's to make the shade a little bit more blendable. I've worked with that formula as well, and when you apply it to the eye, it just applies like a traditional matte, and you don't have any fallout from those sparkly particles either. So even though on initial inspection it might look like you have some of those sequin shades, they translate 100% like matte. So the top and bottom rows work very, very well as matte shadows. I like the way that they selected the tones. It's almost like in trios of lighter to deeper shades, and you can see that you can get like a more peachy look if you go with those. You can get a more neutral tone. You can get a more mauve-y look if you go with those. You can go with greens, browns. There's a lot of versatility here, and you have at least 3 shades with every color family to create a full look in terms of your mattes. The center, of course, is going to be where the palette really shines. These swatch so beautifully and they apply really nicely to the eye. At this point, I've applied all of them except for 2 shades. I've not yet used Thrive or Floral, but I did apply all of the other duochrome, multichrome shades to the eye, and they apply just beautifully over a sticky base or even over regular eyeshadow primer. Because these are multichromes, you really have to kind of play with them to see what the effect is going to be like on the eye. What you see in the pan may not necessarily translate exactly to the eye, although I did find that the shade Sprout and the shade Sundays were pretty true to what you're seeing in the pan. But for instance, the shade Petals has a pretty strong pink shift, so it might be a little deeper than you might originally anticipate. So I do suggest that you swatch the colors together so you can get a really good idea of what you're working with. But this is nothing new where duochromes or multichromes are concerned. One really nice thing about these shimmers is that even though you're going to see in the demos that I worked with my fingertips to apply them, I just personally prefer that method. These pick up so nicely on a brush. So if you use a brush such as something like this one, this is the Refer 21, which is a dupe of the MAC 242 brush. Those shimmers pick up so nicely on the brush and you don't have to work with your fingers at all. So if you're one that does not like to work with your fingers, with this palette you'll be able to get these colors to pick up on your brush and get full intensity. I actually tried that when I was doing an eye off camera where I applied the shimmers with a brush just to see and compare the intensity, and there was actually no difference. I can of course apply them faster if I work with my fingertips, but they do apply well with a brush. So if you do not enjoy working with your fingertips, this palette is not going to give you any trouble whatsoever. I bought this palette along with 2 others, and when I saw the price tag I was balking a little, like wow, I just spent over $100 on palettes. But you know, now that I've played with this one for a considerable amount of time and I've gotten to know it a little bit, I'm so glad I picked up the others because I think that they have a really nice formula. The mattes are nothing like spectacular or out of this world, but they are very easy to blend, very easy to build up, and because they chose the colors so well, you can get a really nice diffused gradient on your eyelid with very little trouble at all. For the most part, it is a standalone palette. I do enjoy having a lighter brow bone shade just to have the shades diffuse into it a little bit better, but I was just using translucent powder and that was fine. If you like to use an inner corner highlight, you can use whatever highlighter you're wearing on your face. That's what I did today, since these shades are all a little bit darker than the traditional inner corner highlights, although it's also fun to use a colorful inner corner highlight for more special looks. That's really my only complaint with the palette, but we have shades like that. They're so common in other palettes that I kind of appreciate that they gave us a very cohesive color story with shades that we can easily use to blend out other colors in the palette. The color story is much nicer in person than it looked on the website. So even though at first I was like, wow, I blew a lot of my monthly budget on Simply Posh Cosmetics, but based on my experience with this palette, I'm actually glad that I picked up the other palettes because those are now sold out as well. I'm definitely on the lookout for the Icy Chill palette to return. Let me go ahead and show you the other 2 palettes that I picked up. The first one is the Cozy Cabin palette, same price as the Picking Peonies palette, $35, and that's what this one looks like. So you can see this one has a little bit more blues and purples on the right hand side. On the left hand side there are still reddish tones, but these veered more towards the reds and the warm neutrals rather than the pinks and the mauve colors like in the Picking Peonies palette. So that's what that one looks like. I haven't gotten a chance to play around with this one yet. I figured let me play with the most recent one and share a review on that one. But having played with the Picking Peonies, I'm very excited to play with this one as well. The other one that I picked up is an all shimmer palette, and this one is called the Northern Lights. This one is priced a little bit lower at $30, and it was a restock. Here's what the palette looks like. It's kind of difficult to show since the background is dark, but what you have here are more jewel tone multichrome shimmers. They're very similar to the It's Belle metallic formula, or even the ones that you find in the Sugar Drizzle polish palettes. So that's what that one looks like. They are going to be restocking another palette in this format. I believe it is later this month or in the beginning of March. They've already announced it on their Instagram, and that palette is called Icy Chill, and the shades in that one are going to be lighter than these. Again, I haven't gotten around to play with this one just yet, but with my experience with the Picking Peonies palette, I'm really excited to get to it. Let's go ahead and get into the 2 looks that I created with the palette. You'll see that I pretty much split the palette in half and I worked with the 2 9-pan palettes separately. For this look, I really want to use the shade Lush and do something a little darker, a little more vampy, because I want to use a dark lip. I don't know why I'm inspired to do that today. This eyeshadow palette doesn't have like a brow setting shade, so I set just the upper part of my eyeshadow primer with this little one size loose setting powder, and I'm going in with the shade Aroma. I'm using the Wayne Goss number 16 brush to put this shade down. Right away, I'm noticing that these shadows are very firmly pressed and you don't get a lot of kick up in the pan. On the inner corner, I'm using the shade Meadow, which is like a neutral brown shade. And I'm using the Wayne Goss number 16 brush for this. This one was a little softer than the original shade. Using the same brush, I'm going in with the shade Elegance, which is a much deeper shade. It's the deepest shade in the palette. And I'm just placing that down on the outer third. Now I'm feeling that they're more powdery. For some reason, the shade Aroma was just a lot more firmly pressed. With that original brush and the shade Aroma, I'm going to go ahead and blend this out. I'm going back into the shade Meadow to re-intensify that inner third. And I'm going to kind of pull it up into the contour of my eye just a little bit. I do want to keep a lot of depth in the outer corner, so I want to re-intensify the shade Elegance. And I'm using the Goss number 19 brush. There's a little bit of purple on the bristles because I was using it for a different look, but I wiped it off on a color switch, so that purple isn't transferring. That's from another palette. Okay, and then I'm going to softly blend inward just at the very top. Using the Pat McGrath Artistry wand as a tacky base, I'm just going to apply this right in the center where I'm going to apply that metallic shadow. I do notice this is kind of erasing the mattes that I already have down. But let's go ahead and see how the shade Lush is going to look. Okay, so this one is your typical MAC blue-brown pigment. It is sticking a lot better where I put down the Artistry wand as well. So I'm going to make sure and blend that into the shade Meadow. And this shade was deeper than I originally wanted, so I want to make sure and re-intensify the outer V with the shade Elegance. It's a little smokier than I originally wanted, so I think I'm going to add just a little bit of the shade Sundays. And I'm going to apply that right in the center. This is a really beautiful shifty shade. It's got like a pink to peach reflect. Really pretty. Yes, that gives it the brightness that I wanted. I'll be doing the other eye off camera as well as my face makeup. If you're interested in all the products I'm using, they will be linked in the description box down below. I want to try out some of these other shades, so I'm going in with the shade Bud on the lower lash line. And this is a Goss number 20 brush. This is a really pretty green shade. It blends out really nicely too. I can diffuse it right under my eye wrinkles to kind of disguise my trouble area. Let's keep going with the smoky vibe and use the shade Green Garden. Sorry, it's called Garden, not Green Garden, but it is a green shade. And this is a rougher 03. This is your finished look, and oh my gosh, this is just everything to me right now. Sometimes you need a vampy moment. I absolutely love it. It's like exactly what I was going for. Starting out with the shade Fresh and a Goss number 16 brush. My brushes are looking dirty, and they are, but they're no longer transferring the color. It's just kind of a stain from darker shades I was using, but I brushed it off on microfiber and the color isn't transferring. This shade is a matte that has just a slight shimmer through it, and I believe it's those particles that are included kind of to help them blend a little bit better, but they are not translating. I didn't expect them to. Same brush, and I'm going to use the shade Peonies. I want to do kind of a rosy crease, but I want to wear a green shadow on my lid. I know that the other look that I created with the palette was green as well, or it had a green vibe. It wasn't really green, but with a lot of other palettes that I've gotten in my collection recently that have had green shadows, I've done my best to resist them and to use other tones. And this time I just want to go right for the shades that are interesting me the most. I'm just continuing to build that shade Blooms in the crease area. I did put down a little bit of translucent setting powder just, right underneath my brows so that my eyeshadows blend a little bit nicer. There's not really a brow setting shade for me personally in the palette. We're going to deepen that out with the shade Blooms. And this is a Goss number 17 brush. Because I have hooded eyes, I always blow it out well above my natural crease. Otherwise, you won't see it when I open my eyes. It's a very pretty blend so far. I just want to intensify the outer corner with a little bit of the shade Blooms again. Now using my original brush, I'm just going to give this a final blend. In my opinion, these three shades blended together beautifully. I'm not sure if I want to make the outer V a little bit darker. I'm going to apply the lid shade first and see how that turns out, and then we'll figure out the outer V. The shade that's calling to me so much is the shade Sprout. I'm going to use the Pat McGrath Artistry wand as a tacky base. I've noticed that this does have a tendency to lift matte shadows, but ordinarily I'm going to cover them up anyway, but it's not my favorite aspect of this wand. It does make metallic shades pop though. So I'm going to go ahead and apply the shade Sprout with my fingers, and it's just as beautiful as the pan promised. I probably will deepen out the outer V just a little bit more to make it look a little bit more cohesive, but that just looks beautiful. For the inner corner, I'm going to use the shade Petals. These metallics are really pretty. Oh my gosh, this one has a duochrome. It's got a pink champagne shift, and I kind of loaded up my fingertip quite a bit there. So that was the shade Petals, and I want to go in with a little bit more of the shade Sprout because I covered it up a little bit more than I wanted. I'm going to go ahead and bring that a little bit further out on my lid as well, and then I will deepen that up with a matte shadow. I'm using a clean brush to blend between those two shades, just to get a nice gradient there in between. And then also to get a little bit more definition in the crease. I'm not necessarily doing a cut crease look, but I want to make it look a little bit more defined. And now I'm taking a Wayne Goss number 20 and the shade Lovely, and that's what I'm going to use to deepen out the outer V. I think it looks a little bit better with the more intense green shade that I put in the lid. And I'm going to go back with the shade Blooms just to make sure that I can diffuse those darker edges into the rosy crease. I'm not worrying too much about going too far outside of my eye because I haven't done my foundation first, and I'll be able to clean that up before I apply my face products. There's the look so far. I'm going to even it out, apply complexion products, and be right back to finish the eye look. I lined my upper waterline with a black liner, and it transferred to the lower waterline, and I kind of decided to go with it to kind of give me that cat eye look you can see in the inner corner, but I left the center blank. So I'm only going to kind of touch up the outer corner. I'm going to start with the shade Peonies so I can carry that pink tone to the lower lash line just a little bit, but I'm going to keep it just on the outer part. My under eyes also look miraculously pretty good today, and so I figured it would be a good day to kind of leave the lower lash line a little bit more bare. I am going to deepen out just the outer corner with the shade Blooms, and I'm using a tiny pencil brush. This is a rougher number 23. And this is your finished look with lower lash mascara and falsies, of course, applied. Nothing too fancy on the lower lash line, just a little bit of definition. Hopefully you enjoyed seeing the details of the two eye looks. For my overall impression on the palette, having used almost every shade, I believe I've used every shade except for 4 at this point, I would definitely recommend the palette. I think at $35, it's very reasonably priced for an indie brand, and the quality is also really, really good, both the mattes and the shimmers. I have to say the shimmers are definitely going to be the star of the palette, but the mattes that were selected are so nicely paired in terms of color story for the duochromes, even with their shifts, that I think it's just a really nicely curated palette, and if you're drawn to the color story, I don't think you would be disappointed. Yeah, so I'm very happy with this palette, and I would definitely recommend it if you are interested in checking it out. I focused the looks on the eyeshadow, of course, but I will have all of the details of both looks linked in the description box down below if you are interested. If you have any questions that I didn't touch upon in the video, please leave those in the comment section, and I will be happy to answer those. That's everything for today's video. If you did enjoy it, please let me know by giving it a big thumbs up and hitting the subscribe button. I don't have a set upload schedule, so be sure to ring the notification bell bell if you would like to be notified every single time I upload. I also share those updates on Twitter, and I am active on Instagram and TikTok if you enjoy those platforms as well. Thanks again for spending a few minutes of your day with me. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you again very, very soon on my next one. Bye-bye.